You know, when they're teaching us to pray, they say, don't say I know, because duh, if you're saying what you're saying, people already know you know that. It helps me presence myself to be here with you. Stepping into that powerful, limitless awareness that I am of that one that created and is creating, that one that is all there is. Calling it God, calling it Spirit, calling it Source. You can call it George. Doesn't matter what you call it. It is the source of every single thing. It is the vibration of the universe, and we are each of it. I am of it, which means I have only the limitations of my own mind that keep me from believing in my complete and total ofness of that. That creates, that is love. It is love. It loves us, maybe, but it is love. That is love. That is wisdom. That is power, joy, grace. You name those good things, that's what it is. So, because I am of it, I am wisdom, power, grace. You name it. And that is true for each of us. Breathing deeply into that knowing, allowing it to well up from inside. I know. I walk and talk and have my being in that love, grace, ease, wisdom. I overflow. Filling up and spilling over is what we are calling forth this coming year. I'm starting now. Spilling over. I don't have to worry about running out of anything because it's all Source that gives it to me. I open up those floodgates and I say yes. And what comes back to me is more of that good. It just happens. And I am grateful beyond measure to be in this august community of people who know this deep in their souls, who are learning this deep in their souls. Because when we want it, guess what? It comes. When you call it, it comes. How are you today? Fabulous. Guess what? Fabulous comes. So I surrender to that knowing over and over in great gratitude. And I let it go. Because God's got this. And so it is.
So this time of year, I bring with me a practice. Many of you know that I grew up Catholic, and some of the stuff from the Catholics, I kind of went, no, done. But there's a few little traditions I love to bring forward and look at through fresh eyes, through the eyes of religious science, through the eyes of metaphysics, through the eyes of a different level of sacredness. And one of those is the Advent wreath. And cultures have been, so the Christian, originally Catholic, and then Christian culture has been celebrating Advent since the 400s, 1600 years of this celebration. And it's a process of looking towards, Advent literally means coming towards or arriving at. And it's looking at, it's a celebration of the birth of Christ. For some cultures, it's the hoping for the second coming of Christ. To me, you and I are the second coming of Christ. Everybody who's ever born is the second coming of the Christ, because we're all the Christ in form, whether we realize it or not. So I don't put a lot of stock into, I'm not waiting for some guy who died 2,000 years ago to come back, Anyway, I won't go into that too far. I could go down that path for a very long time, but I won't. But what I do want to talk about is it's the rebirth of light within us, the remembering of that light within us. It's as we talked about, that wholeness that we already are and remembering that. that our wonderful practitioner, Buffy, mentioned in the opening prayer. And so we have the 5 candles, 4 of them circle around, and it's a path of preparation. It's a path of getting ready. In our culture, oftentimes we think that we're already done. We don't really need to do anything. We could just step into something and we're ready. But the real truth, in case you haven't ever noticed it, is it takes preparation, yes? Yes? And so there's that preparing. John the Baptist in the Bible said, prepare the way for the Lord. And so it's prepare the consciousness, prepare our consciousness to be even more deeply aware of this celebration of the coming of light. And that's what I celebrate, is that light within us, that light that is all around us. And whether we honor that with the solstice or with Hanukkah or with the enlightenment of the Buddha, which comes up this week in Bodhi Day, or the birth of Jesus, who is considered the light of the world, we're looking at the celebrations of light and the rebirth of the awareness of our own awareness of the light that you and I are. So that's what we're doing with this. So each of the 4 candles represents a different quality. And so I'm going to light each of these each week as we go along. I'm also doing a little written meditation on each one that you can subscribe to the email list by going to our office, or you can just find it on our website. I believe that Sandy put it underneath events or upcoming talks. I can't remember which one she put it under. But anyways, you can find my each weekly thought. This week's thought is on hope. This week's candle is about hope. And those of you who know Ernest Holmes know that hope wasn't Ernest's favorite word. He said it's better than despair, but it's a false, kind of, what do you call it? It's a subtle illusion and unconscious compromise. But hope is better than despair, and hope is oftentimes the place where we start when we're feeling darkness, when we're feeling lonely, when we're feeling when we're feeling out of touch. Hope is that first spark that says, I'm going to hope for something better. I'm going to start to aim for something better. And eventually that hope hopefully moves into faith, where we know something better. And that's what we teach here. But we look at that hope, and we allow ourselves to move into that opening, that this is the setting of the intention. I intend over these next 4 weeks to be more conscious of that birth of light, of that light within me, and to allow it to shine more brightly. Would you be okay with doing that?
Yes.
Great. Me too. Meister Eckhart, who was a Christian mystic in the 1300s, said, God expects one thing of you, and that is that you should come out of yourself and let God be God in you. Isn't that great? So we're here to let God be God in us. So that's our Advent thought for the day. This week, this whole year, I should say, we've been looking at the theme of living out loud. And we're going to wrap up this last month of the year with looking at living as wholeness. Living as wholeness. And so today we start off with embracing wholeness. And let me get my paperwork here. Ernest Holmes says, life is one perfect wholeness. The universe is a unit. God is, as the song just said, one. God is one. But what exactly is wholeness? What is this wholeness thing that we speak of? So wholeness can describe both the quality of oneness itself, and it can describe the feeling that we have of being at peace and feeling a connection with something larger than us. Whether we call it God or George, whether we call it nature or humanity or life itself, that connection with, and we've all experienced that, haven't we? We've had a moment where we just feel whole, where everything just feels right and aligned. Sometimes I hear people say we're part of God, we're part of the whole, but a whole doesn't have parts. All of it is whole. Rumi said, we are not drops in the ocean, we are the whole ocean in a drop. Hafiz put it a little bit differently. He said, another Sufi poet, the beloved said, my name is not complete without yours. I am made whole by your life. Each soul completes me. So that is what we're here to do with wholeness. You know, modern humanity sees everything in and as parts. But we're not just parts. You know, we look at the ecosystem of the earth and we think, oh, I can do this over here in this part and it won't affect anything else. And as we grow into greater and greater awareness, we recognize, no, the whole thing's tied together. I remember decades ago hearing Alan Watts say, there's not a baby that burps in Mill Valley that doesn't affect the farthest end of the cosmos. Right? And so we're not parts. We are expressions, we are individualizations of the wholeness itself. So when we speak of wholeness, it's also important to recognize we're not talking about perfection, right? So we have a limited conditioned thinking that has an idea of what perfection is. Last month we looked at all aspects of life. We looked at the mundane, we looked at the sacred, we looked at the profane, and we recognized that it's all sacred. It's all sacred. It's all one. It's all unique aspects of an infinite wholeness. We might place labels on it, and yet it's still the wholeness. And so whether we recognize it or not, it is that wholeness, it is that oneness. Where we can get caught is when we equate wholeness with perfection. And the idea of perfection often is that life must correspond to what I want, how I think it should be. And it is. I mean, you all should be acting the way that I think you should act, yes? And you all think I should be acting the way that each of you expects me to act, yes? Okay. My next door neighbor Steve said that yesterday he was out hanging balls in his tree and the mailman came up in his cart and started getting in his face about hanging Christmas ornaments and how that's a sin and it's a violation of the Bible, and he was going to go to hell for that, and quoted him some Bible verse. You know, because he's not doing it perfectly the way that that person views it. We all think that the world should be the way that we view it. That's perfectionism. You know, recently I've seen posts and emails complaining about the weather. Oh, it's too cold, too early this year. And then how early it gets dark. I had an email from a friend of mine who, it was kind of a letter, and he was ranting about how this isn't daylight savings time. How come it's so dark? And it's like, you may have taken too much of your Huasco to recognize that we're not in daylight saving time anymore. And the idea of how this works is the fact that the planet's been doing this for a few billion years, you know? But we can get this idea that life must correspond to my preferences. I'm sorry, it doesn't. I know that's disappointing for many of us. We were talking last night about control freaks. And not all of us have healed our control freak nature, have we?
No. Well, we should.
Oh, yeah, they should, Buffy. Right? So we include in that such things as having the perfect partner who does everything that I want them to do, but doesn't expect the same from me, by the way. We have the perfect politicians. We have the perfect minister.
Yes.
You know, when I was first here, people did a review of me, you know, kind of an assessment of me, and I said, how about if I do a review of everybody in the congregation? Ooh, what if I do a review of the whole congregation? Can't we just turn it around? We look for the perfect church, we look for the perfect neighbor. Buffy's in ministerial school, and she recently sent me a reading that was regarding kind of our nature of perfection and our attachment to romanticism. And it said, we were encouraged to place an impossible burden of expectation upon a partner. We would ask them to be our lover, our best friend, our confidant, our nurse, our financial advisor, our chauffeur, our co-educator, our social partner, and our superlative sex mate. And then, when they failed in a few of these roles, as they inevitably would, we were to interpret their inevitable imperfections, say that 5 times real fast, as a sign, not that we had got to know someone properly, but that we had mistakenly come together with the wrong person. The consequence of this ideology has been the discovery of extensive new ways of feeling dissatisfied, disappointed, and ashamed around ourselves and our partners. It has made us a good deal more lonely and notably less able to love. So that's what perfectionism can sometimes create for us. And this is about as far as you can get from knowing wholeness. Wholeness. Breathe that in for a moment. The writer Parker Palmer reminds us that there's a hidden wholeness in all things. A hidden wholeness in all things. This wholeness is our divine nature. It is already and always are. So we and everyone else and everything else are already whole. Even that mailman who chewed out my next door neighbor and my next door neighbor, all of them are whole. We so often have our lists of how we or they are not perfect, and again mistaking our ideas of perfection for wholeness. Our sense of wholeness often has to do with our expectations, and our expectations have to do with our desires, and ultimately our deepest desire is to know the divine within us and within everything. To know this divine nature, this nature of divine wholeness, the qualities of God, what Joseph Campbell calls the rapture of being alive. That's what we want to know, yes? Check within yourself. Isn't that what you want to know? It doesn't have to be perfect. And then what we do oftentimes is we try to find these qualities, yes? I'm going to go find wholeness. I'm going to go find love. I'm going to find it in other people and other things and other experiences. And those people like us are finite expressions of the infinite and therefore not able to completely fulfill the emptiness that comes from believing wholeness is outside of us. To believe the believing that we are not whole and must therefore seek and try to find that wholeness, which is sort of like the fish that is trying to find water, going in search of water. The New Thought writer Eric Butterworth said, "You are a perfect idea in infinite mind. You are whole now. This wholeness is the only way the universe knows you." This infinite consciousness only knows you as perfection because it only knows itself as perfection. We're the ones who forget. Yes? We can make ourselves crazy with that forgetting, and yet we're still always whole. So wholeness is not a state to be attained, but something to be known and experienced. By knowing and experiencing myself, by knowing and experiencing each other, by knowing and experiencing all of life. As I spoke about last week, life is all this stuff. It's light, it's dark, it's everything in between and beyond. It's cold, it's hot, it's warm, it's cool, and everything else. It's joyous, it's easy, it's hard, it's painful. It's all of this. All of this. You know, it's been said that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Part of life is painful. Have you noticed? You know, anybody here not experienced pain somewhere, sometime in their lives? I'm going to put my hand down because I haven't either. It's our attachment to our expectations which prevent us from letting life as it is flow. See, wholeness is a flow. It's not a static condition. It's not a place you arrive at and then we're done. You know, one of my favorite Talking Heads songs is a song called Heaven, and it satirically describes heaven as a place where nothing ever happens. Goes, when this party is over, it will start again. It'll not be any different. It'll be exactly the same. When this kiss is over, it'll start again. It won't be any different. It'll be exactly the same. And for many people, the state of nothing ever changing is their ideal state. But A, I would be bored. I don't know about you. And B, that's not how life is. See, our suffering, not our pain, but our suffering comes out of our expectations. But when we trade our expectations for appreciations, when we trade our expectations for our gratitudes, we open to seeing the hidden wholeness that's always present. And our suffering ends even if the pain doesn't. Thich Nhat Hanh, in speaking about the Buddhist path, the Buddha is famous for the Four Noble Truths. And the first one of those is life is suffering, or life is difficult, or life has pain, depending on your interpretation of that. And a lot of Buddhists tend to get stuck there. Buddha said life is suffering, so let's suffer. That was the starting point. The Four Noble Truths, that was the starting point. He said life is suffering. The second noble truth is our thinking or our attachment makes it so. The third noble truth is there is a way out. And the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path, which is to live in right alignment with every aspect of our life. So he talks about, Thich Nhat Hanh says, it's true the Buddha taught the truth of suffering, but he also taught the truth of dwelling happily in things as they are. To succeed in this practice, we must stop trying to prove that everything is suffering. In fact, we must stop trying to prove anything. If we touch the truth of suffering with our mindfulness, we will be able to recognize and identify our specific suffering, its specific causes, and the way to remove those causes and our suffering. That's the Buddhist path. That practice also, when I read it, reminds me of what our practitioners do to help us to become aware. Because a person comes into to meet with a practitioner, oftentimes having some sort of a suffering going on. Yes, something is out of alignment, something that's not quite working. And they use their mindfulness, and they support people in recognizing and identifying the cause of their specific suffering, and in finding ways to alleviate that, to move from that. All spiritual traditions have at their heart moving from suffering to joy and aliveness. The Buddha's whole purpose was to find and alleviate suffering. That's why he sat under the Bodhi tree. In December 8th is Bodhi Day, which celebrates the enlightenment of the Buddha. And his whole path was, when he had first encountered suffering, was to find a way to relieve suffering for the world. And he spent 5 years wandering around as a monk, finally realized that didn't work, and finally ended up sitting underneath what's called a Bodhi tree. It's a form of a ficus tree that grows especially in the Indian subcontinent, as well as other places, and sat there and said, I'm not leaving until I understand the nature of suffering and how to alleviate it. And so we celebrate on December 8th the fact that he did have that understanding. Jesus, another mystic, said, I have come that you may have suffering more abundantly. No, wait, that's not what he said. I have come that you may have life more abundantly. Yes? Okay. Lao Tzu, Muhammad, Baha'u'llah out of the Baha'i faith, and all had a vision of a better world through knowing the infinite oneness, the infinite wholeness that already exists. And most of them identified that with being within and with being here now, not in some remote, far-off place or time. And that we must shift from our normal, conditioned way of viewing life and the world into one that sees more deeply the finished kingdom in which we walk. The already existing wholeness. And that this shift ends suffering. Breathe. Bless you. Often we don't understand the flow of wholeness until we look back on it later in life. There's a lovely Hindu story that I want to share with you that talks about that. There's this seeker, if you will, who's been seeking after ultimate truth. What is the truth? What is the absolute ultimate truth? For many years. And eventually he's told to go to a cave, and in that cave there will be a well, and the well will give him the answer. Now, I don't believe in talking wells, but it's a good story, okay? We won't get too literal about that. Ask the well, what is truth, he was told, and the well will reveal it to you. So he finds this cave, and inside he finds the well. And he asks the question of his life, what is truth? From the depths of the well there was a reply. Go to the village crossroad. There you shall find what you are seeking. So he's filled with hope. Hope. Runs out to the crossroad of the nearby village, only to find three rather uninteresting shops. One shop sold pieces of metal, another shop sold wood, and the third shop sold thin strips of metal and wiring. And there didn't seem to be anything having much to do with the revelation of truth at that spot. So finally disappointed, the seeker returns to the well and demanded an explanation, but was told that in due time he would understand. Don't you love it when you kind of get that? You'll understand down the road. How many of us were told that as kids? Yeah. How many of us has told that to our kids? Yeah. He was told that in due time he would understand. So feeling that he had been made to look foolish, he left the cave and set out again on his quest seeking truth. And so many, many more years pass by, and he's growing older, and he's moving more slowly and more deliberately. He begins spending more time in his life being more present with what's before him, seeing things more completely. And one night as he's walking through a village, the sound of sitar music caught his attention. It was beautiful. It was played with great mastery and inspiration. And deeply moved, this truth seeker sat before the sitar player. He watched the musician's fingers moving over the strings. Yes, I'm playing air sitar right now. And he began to intently see the sitar itself. In that, he began to realize that the sitar was made out of wood, pieces of metal, and wires. Just like those he had seen years before in the three stores at the crossroad. And he finally understood the message of the well, that he had already been given everything he needed. The task is to assemble and use it. The parts of our lives are not so meaningful as long as we perceive only separate fragments. But when we see the fragments as a whole, a deeper, more vivid reality of meaning emerges. So this week, I'm going to invite you to do a spiritual practice to view life knowing that there is already wholeness. To look at everything and say, whether I see it or not, there is wholeness right here, including when you look in the mirror. Okay? To look past the surface and to practice appreciation instead of expectation. Are you willing to do that this week? Yes. Yeah. Me too. So I want to close with a quote from Ernest Holmes. He says, every person represents an individualization of universal wholeness, the love, peace, joy, and freedom of spirit. The power of the Spirit expresses through every atom of our being now, this moment. Take that in. The power of the Spirit expresses through every atom of your being now, this moment. There's nothing of you that is separate from His wholeness. We have an affirmation to anchor that in. Say this with me. I look past my expectations and see wholeness everywhere and in everything, including myself. Once more, I look past my expectations and see wholeness everywhere and in everything, including myself. So it is. Thank you.